I begin to believe that this journey would be easier if I wasn't so literal.
Very strange times. You've just done this gig at the Barbican, which I know it's been. When was the last time you did a gig? It was a while back.
June 2019. It was like the 10th anniversary of my first album, so we played the UK. And yeah, that was it.
300 odd people, wasn't it? But it's a cavernous venue.
I think at first I looked out and I had this sort of old instinct of, oh no, there's no one there. You know, nobody bought tickets. And then I remembered, and then we were on stage, and after the first song, the applause was coming from strange places, and my instinct was to think, oh no, they don't like it. But then I started thinking, it's not a wave of energy from a crowd. You're looking at individuals. And I started looking at pockets of people. I saw this one guy's wearing a face shield. And you just think, everyone's tried so hard to be here tonight. They've put themselves through so many challenges just to come. And they're emoting through their face shields. And so, like, in a way, it's even more rewarding than the energy of a crowd that's applauding. So I got into it in a different way. It was like a sort of like more, it was like a deeper way. It wasn't like, yay, they like it, they're clapping. It was more like, we're here, so we must commit to this.
One thing, having seen you a few times, you're very good at interacting with the audience.
Oh, thank you.
That warmth, even with an empty room, was very apparent. Did you feel that? I mean, is that an easy thing to do in a situation like that?
I felt so grateful to those people for being there. I couldn't not connect with them, and also I knew that my family and my best friends, I knew that my close friends in other time zones had gotten together in order to watch it, so I felt like I was with everyone that I love in the whole world, which is interesting. That's something cool about streaming. Yeah,
because you said that on stage, it's so weird here, you can't fill this room right in front of you, the space a few yards in front, but you were talking to people around the world. That must have been a very empowering kind of thing.
Yeah, it was quite magical, and at first there was a lot of pressure, knowing that usually when you play a gig in a city or a town, you're like one of lots of events going on that night, but I'm not sure there were any other gigs going on in London that night. So it was a lot of pressure. It was just a kind of like subconscious pressure of like, gosh, we're really doing something here, and it has to go well.
Unprecedented times. I mean, you say you haven't played a gig, and everyone knows that musicians now, rather than relying on sales, it's where it's at, is playing live, isn't it? How tough has it been for you and for everybody?
I think I know quite a few people in my situation where you're established, but you're not massive. So for me, touring is like throwing money into a hole. But to do something beautiful and to promote your work and to connect with people. But in terms of work, to do less touring and more studio work is actually good for me, but it's not really what the job is. The job is about bringing music to people.
Are you relying
I don't rely on touring income at all. Right. I work very hard to make a profit from touring, and a lot of that is merch, but I'm much more likely to earn my living from other projects. Anything that you do for TV and film, anything like for radio, is way more reliable than my touring income. But it's sad to think that the same people that you see all the time in Newcastle, Sheffield, Paris, places, the same audience members that you see every time you put a record out, that I'm not going to see them this time, and those people, they love going to gigs. I love going to gigs, and it's an industry in peril. Just before the gig, my agent told me that he wasn't sure that the dates we had next year were going to be able to happen. So when I went on stage, I thought, this could be my last gig until 2022. And who knows what life is going to bring. So treat it like your last gig.
Other musicians in your community, and we're in a musical community here, I mean, it must be so difficult for them.
I know friends in New York who were, because I was living in New York before, and a bunch of my friends in New York made the album with me, and they were going to tour for the next 2 years, and then suddenly they're earning unemployment money and they're at home. Sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, it's actually kind of nice to be at home," or "I like spending more time with my kids." But yeah, I mean that's people's livelihoods.
You grew up in Hong Kong, right? And did you leave after 1997 when the handover came?
We left before '97.
So just before knowing that the handover was going to come. So you grew up. I mean, your adolescence was in Hong Kong.
Was in England. I left Hong Kong when I was 11.
Right.
Yeah.
So your formative years, when you were probably getting into music.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, in Hong Kong, I mean, it's kind of, you know, being British. You kind of obviously looked across to the west a bit. What was that like? Were you able to go and find music in shops and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, Hong Kong in the 90s was very international. It had, I think, other than like maybe Japan, I would say Hong Kong was like a major hub for bands to come, and there was Tower Records, HMV. When I grew up, I would say that the culture for young people was mostly American and Japanese. Those were the dominant subculture influencing places.
So your mum's Chinese, your dad's English. You grew up post-11 in the UK. And you've gone back, and this record, which is a wonderful thing. I mean, it really is. I mean, I think, you know, some of the melodies on it are really lovely. It's kind of, you recorded it before the protests. I mean, it's been on the news every night for seems like 18 months now. I know it's stopped now, but I mean, how do you? That must be so difficult for you with a kind of, you know, you see yourself as half and half. How tough is that?
It was awful being in Hong Kong during the protests. I think this record was written in a time when I was connecting with Hong Kong for the first time since I was a kid, and I really was falling in love with it and seeing its beauty and its spirit.
There's more to life than New York City. As I climb 10,000 steps up to the temple, I begin to believe that this journey would be easier if I wasn't so literal. While I'm gone, look after yourself. I don't want to hear reports that you were lonely. And if you see the moon over some avenue, think of me, think of me.
As I wrote the album, I ended up moving back to Hong Kong and starting my family there.
Right. This is pre-protest.
Yeah, so to then watch it sort of devolve was really hard. And putting this album out has been difficult at times because it means realizing how much things have changed. But it's also been quite beautiful because it's been a rough year for us all, and I think to have a piece of work that reminds me of a time when things were a bit more peaceful and full of possibility weirdly makes me feel like, okay, back then I didn't know what was coming ahead, but right now we don't know what is coming ahead. There's always rough times ahead and there's always peaceful times ahead. So I actually feel quite happy.
You once told me about the moon and the first man to walk on her, how they saw the view of the oceans without water. They were searching for a Chinese queen, couple of salesmen trying to share an American dream. She looked at them like, what do you mean?
I am very, very deeply linked to Hong Kong. I became a parent and then I lived through the protests and I came back to COVID. So haven't really known how to write about that. So if I hadn't written the album then I wouldn't have written it, I don't think.
It's not a political record at all, and that's probably a good thing. It's a perfect counterpoint to what's been going on.
When you're in Hong Kong, what's happening is very, very visceral. But when you're away from it, you feel a sense of futility, like what's happening and what can I do? And I gradually put together a bunch of stuff in my head about what you can do, and I think sort of like keeping the culture alive and loving the culture and reading its writers, listening to its musicians, watching its films it's really fun. It's a bit like Tinkerbell. If you keep it going, it will stay alive. So it's just a way for a bunch of people I know who love Hong Kong to talk about the things that we love, just culture really, like positive things that we love about Hong Kong, and to just keep it in our hearts.
When we achieve weightlessness, we'll fly into the air like chocolate. Look down on a beam to the places that we've been.
You just reminded me of the gig I went to of yours at the Village Underground in London. And there was a great moment where, which kind of sums up the times really, where you handed out hymn sheets and everybody sang the Leonard Cohen song, Anthem. Do you remember that? Yeah. There's a crack in everything. It's where the light comes in. Is that what we need, right?
Yeah. I think Leonard Cohen exited the world at a timely moment. He missed out a lot of the stuff that came next. Yeah, I feel like I've cracked this year, and I think that it's made me a little deeper. I hope that I'm pretty lucky. I haven't lost anyone, or I think the most important thing we can do now is to continue being creative, even if we're not currently getting paid for it and we've got to, scramble to make our lives work. It's still good to make time to be creative and to share that, sing together, and to remind kids that they should, keep that stuff alive, because it's really our duty as humans to keep that going.
Where have you